The air at Al Dafra Air Base hung thick and heavy, a soupy mixture of jet fuel, ozone, and the fine, pervasive dust of the Arabian Desert. In the cavernous, climate-controlled hangar of the 95th Fighter Squadron, this atmosphere was the breath of life for Senior Airman Anya Sharma. She was a maintenance crew chief, a prodigy whose name was spoken with a kind of reverent awe by the other ground crew. They said she didn't just fix the F-22 Raptors, she communed with them. She could diagnose a hydraulic fluctuation by the sound it made, or trace a faulty circuit by the faintest scent of burnt ozone. She was quiet, almost painfully shy, her hands, stained with the permanent grime of lubricants and hydraulic fluid, her only real voice. To the pilots, the swaggering, confident aces who flew these quarter-billion-dollar machines, she was chief, a respected and indispensable part of the machine, but a part nonetheless. They were the warriors. She was the one who sharpened their swords. This dynamic was personified by the squadron's top ace, Major Marcus Thorne, call sign Solo. He was a pilot of immense, almost supernatural skill with an ego to match. He appreciated Anya's genius in the way a king appreciates a skilled armorer, a necessary prerequisite for his own glory. He treated her with a friendly, almost familial condescension, a pat on the shoulder here. Keep her flying for me. Chief there, never seeing the woman, only the function she performed. The tension on the base had been escalating for weeks. Intelligence reports spoke of a new, sophisticated threat of regional instability threatening to boil over. The F-22s of the 95th were the tip of the spear, the primary deterrent against any aggression, and they were being run ragged. Anya and her maintenance crews were working 18-hour days, their lives a relentless cycle of pre-flight checks, post-flight diagnostics, and the constant, painstaking work of keeping the most advanced fighter jets in the world in a state of perfect, lethal readiness. One afternoon, during a final systems check on Major Thorne's Raptor, Anya noticed a microscopic fluctuation in the power coupling to the primary fly-by-wire system. It was a ghost in the machine, a data point so tiny it was well within acceptable operating parameters. But to Anya, it was a whisper of a problem, a discordant note in the perfect symphony of the aircraft. "Sir," she said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant, as Thorne approached for his pre-flight briefing. "I'm seeing a minor power variance in the flight control bus. I'd like to ground the aircraft for a full diagnostic." Thorne, impatient to get into the air, simply laughed, the sound echoing in the vast hangar. "A variance. Chief, these things have more variances than a politician has opinions. If it's in the green, it's good to go. Just make sure she's fueled and armed. I'll handle the flying." He clapped her on the shoulder, a gesture of dismissive affection, and climbed into the cockpit, utterly oblivious to the quiet, worried look in the eyes of the woman who knew his aircraft better than he did. The storm broke not in the sky, but on the ground. The attack was a masterpiece of surprise and brutal efficiency. It began not with the scream of incoming jets, but with the silent, deadly rain of mortar fire. A coordinated, clandestine assault by a team of enemy special forces who had breached the base's perimeter defenses. Their target was singular and obvious, the flight line and the row of F-22 Raptors parked there like sleeping dragons. Their goal was to cut the head off the snake, to destroy America's air superiority on the ground before it could ever be brought to bear. The first mortar rounds landed with devastating accuracy, turning the tarmac into a hellscape of fire, smoke, and shrapnel. Alarms blared across the base, the calls to scramble, mixing with the screams of the wounded and the roar of explosions. It was a decapitation strike, and it was succeeding. Pilots and ground crew, caught completely by surprise, scattered for cover, the disciplined order of the airbase dissolving into a chaotic, desperate fight for survival. In the midst of this chaos, Major Thorne was already in his cockpit, the canopy sealed, his hands flying across the controls as he raced through the pre-flight startup sequence. He was a warrior, and his instinct was to get his weapon into the fight. Anya, who had been overseeing the final arming of his aircraft, had been knocked to the ground by the first blast, but was unhurt. Her first instinct was to run for the hardened shelters, the logical, trained response of all ground personnel. But she looked up and saw Thorne's Raptor sitting there, fully fueled, fully armed, a perfect, beautiful instrument of war and a perfect stationary target. At that moment, another mortar round, this one closer, exploded just off the port side of the jet. The concussion wave was a physical blow, and a storm of white-hot shrapnel ripped through the air. Anya saw the reinforced polycarbonate of the F-22's canopy craze and splinter, a spiderweb of cracks appearing in an instant. She saw Thorne slump forward in his seat, his head striking the control panel. The pilot was hit. The base was under attack, and the only viable weapon that could save them was a sitting duck with an unconscious man at the controls. The world seemed to slow down for Anya. The explosions, the shouting, the sirens, it all faded into a distant, muffled roar. All she could see was the damaged Raptor and the slumped figure of its pilot. The ground crew chief was screaming at everyone to get to the bunkers, his voice a frantic, desperate plea. But Anya didn't hear him. She was moving, not away from the danger, but directly towards its epicenter. She ran across the exposed tarmac, the ground shaking with explosions, her small frame a defiant, solitary figure in a landscape of fire and death. She reached the side of the F-22 and scrambled up the boarding ladder. The canopy was shattered, but the locking mechanism was still intact. She hit the emergency release. With a hiss of hydraulics, the canopy opened, revealing the scene inside. Major Thorne was alive, but barely. Shrapnel had pierced his shoulder and neck, and he was bleeding profusely, his blood matting the collar of his flight suit. He was unconscious, slumped over the controls, a dead weight holding the most powerful weapon on the base hostage. Anya's hands moved with a purpose and a skill that had nothing to do with being a mechanic. She unfastened Thorne's complex harness with a practiced efficiency, her fingers finding the clips and releases as if she had done it 1,000 times before. She grabbed him under the arms and, with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength that seemed impossible for her size, she pulled him from the pilot's seat. She dragged him down the ladder, a dead weight of nearly 200 pounds, and laid him on the relative safety of the tarmac, shielded by the aircraft's massive landing gear. She ripped a piece of her own uniform and, using the brutal, efficient technique of a combat lifesaver, she fashioned a makeshift tourniquet for his arm and applied direct, firm pressure to the wound in his neck. She had just bought him a few precious minutes of life. But the base was still being overrun. The enemy was advancing across the airfield, their objective the row of parked fighter jets. Thorne's Raptor, its cockpit now empty, was still the primary target. Anya looked at the unconscious pilot on the ground, then at the empty cockpit above her, and then at the advancing enemy. And in that moment, she made a decision that would not only change her life, but the fate of every person on that base. She turned and climbed back up the ladder. The ground crew chief, watching from the relative safety of a maintenance vehicle, stared in utter, horrified disbelief. He saw his best mechanic, a woman he respected and admired, climb back into the cockpit of the damaged fighter jet. "Sharma, what in God's name are you doing?" He screamed into his radio. "Get out of there. That's an order." Anya ignored him. She slid into the pilot's seat, the blood of its previous occupant still warm. She strapped herself into the harness, her movements sure and certain. Her hands, which knew every wire and every circuit of this machine from the outside, now moved across the complex array of controls on the inside with an impossible, intimate familiarity. Her voice, when it came over the squadron's radio frequency, was not the quiet, hesitant voice of a senior airman. It was the calm, steady, and utterly authoritative voice of a pilot. "Tower, this is Raptor 07, she said, her voice cutting through the panic chatter. "Major Thorne is down. I'm taking the aircraft. I repeat, I'm taking the aircraft." A torrent of confused, angry voices erupted over the radio. The tower controller, the base commander, her own crew chief, all ordering her to stand down, to get out of the plane. She ignored them all. She was no longer a mechanic. She was a weapon, and she was activating herself. In the base command center, the wing commander, a grizzled colonel named Evans, watched the drama unfold on his screens, his face a mask of fury and confusion. "Who the hell is Senior Airman Sharma?" he roared. "And why is she hijacking my F-22? An intelligence officer, his fingers flying across a keyboard, pulled up her service record. "Sir," the officer said, his voice filled with a dawning awe, "you're not going to believe this." He turned the screen toward the commander. Anya Sharma's record was a bizarre, contradictory document. She had enlisted 4 years ago, with test scores in mechanical and electrical engineering that were literally off the charts. But before that, there was another, mostly redacted, service history. A commission, the rank of captain, and a single, unbelievable line item under her training qualifications: graduate, United States Air Force Test Pilot School, Edwards Air Force Base. She was a ghost of former test pilot, one of the most elite and highly trained aviators in the world, who had, for some unknown reason, washed out or disappeared and then re-enlisted as a common mechanic. While the commanders on the ground were still reeling from the revelation, Anya was already in motion. She taxied the damaged Raptor out of the hangar, her movements with the powerful, sensitive aircraft shockingly precise. She weaved the jet through the burning debris on the tarmac, a masterful display of ground control. She reached the main runway, dodged a mortar crater that would have destroyed a lesser pilot, and pushed the throttle to its limit. The F-22, a wounded dragon, roared down the runway and leaped into the sky. The aircraft was badly damaged. The flight controls were sluggish, the canopy was shattered, and a dozen warning lights were flashing in front of her. But in the air, Anya was no longer a mechanic or a ghost. She was an ace. She compensated for the damage with an instinctive, brilliant series of control inputs, her hands and feet dancing on the controls, keeping the unstable jet flying through sheer, unadulterated skill. She then turned the wounded bird back towards the base. She was no longer fleeing. She was hunting. The effect of a single F-22, even a damaged one, on a ground assault was immediate and devastating. Anya became the base's avenging angel. She made a low pass over the advancing enemy, the roar of her twin engines a sound of terrifying, righteous fury. She didn't have the sophisticated targeting data she would normally receive from ground control, so she relied on her own eyes, on the instincts of a predator. She unleashed the Raptor's 20mm cannon, not on an enemy aircraft, but on the enemy soldiers below, the stream of explosive shells tearing through their ranks with brutal efficiency. She followed up with a perfectly placed small-diameter bomb, obliterating the enemy's command vehicle and shattering the coherence of their attack. She was not just a pilot. She was a one-woman army, a singular force of destruction that turned the tide of the entire battle in less than 5 minutes. The enemy assault, which had been on the verge of overrunning the base's defenses, broke completely, devolving into a panicked, headlong retreat. The quiet mechanic had single-handedly saved them all. When the immediate threat was gone, she brought the crippled Raptor back around, landing it with a breathtaking gentleness that defied the extent of its damage. As she climbed out of the cockpit, covered in hydraulic fluid and Major Thorne's blood, she was met by a wall of silent, awestruck faces. The ground crew, the other pilots, the base commander, they all just stared. The mechanic they had all underestimated was not just a pilot. She was an artist, a warrior, a legend. Major Thorne, stabilized and conscious on a gurney, being loaded into an ambulance, watched her. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a look of profound, humbling respect. He tried to speak, but could only mouth a single, silent word. "Ow!" Anya simply looked at him, then at the sky, her secret finally, irrevocably out in the open.